Rain lashed against the windows of Kenji's study, mirroring the storm raging inside him. His prized collection of antique Japanese swords, usually a source of pride, now seemed to mock him. One was missing. Not just any sword, but the legendary Kusanagi no Tsurugi replica, a priceless family heirloom. Kenji, a renowned art collector, had hosted a small gathering that evening. Among the guests were Professor Ito, a renowned historian, Madame Hana, a wealthy socialite with a penchant for gossip, Mr. Tanaka, a quiet, unassuming businessman, and Miss Akari, a young, aspiring novelist. All had admired the Kusanagi replica, its intricate carvings gleaming under the soft study lights. Now, just hours later, it was gone. He'd locked the study after the guests departed, the only key in his possession. The windows were secured. There was no sign of forced entry. The sword had vanished into thin air. Kenji called his old friend, Detective Hiroshi, a man known for his sharp mind and unorthodox methods. Hiroshi arrived quickly, his trench coat dripping with rain. He surveyed the study, his eyes scanning every detail. "A locked room mystery," Hiroshi murmured, tapping his pipe. "The best kind." He examined the lock, a complex mechanism passed down through Kenji's family. "No signs of tampering," he confirmed. He checked the windows, then the fireplace, even peering up the chimney. Nothing. Everyone had access to the study this evening? Hiroshi asked, turning to Kenji. Kenji nodded. They were all here for drinks and conversation. I showed them the sword, then locked it away. Hiroshi interviewed each guest individually. Professor Ito spoke of his fascination with the sword's historical significance. Madame Hana, ever the observer, recounted the subtle interactions between the guests, noting a flicker of envy in Tanaka's eyes when Kenji spoke of the sword's value. Tanaka himself remained reserved, offering only polite answers. Miss Akari, seemingly nervous, claimed she'd been engrossed in conversation with Professor Ito and hadn't paid much attention to the sword. Hiroshi returned to the study, a thoughtful expression on his face. He circled the room, his gaze lingering on the display case where the sword had rested. He noticed a small, almost imperceptible scratch on the polished wood. He crouched down, examining it closely. "Ingenious," he muttered. He asked Kenji for a magnifying glass. Under the lens, the scratch revealed a series of tiny, almost invisible lines. Hiroshi followed the lines with his finger, tracing them to a small, ornate box hidden behind the display case. He opened the box. Inside, nestled amongst velvet lining, was a duplicate of the Kusanagi replica. But this one was made of cheap metal, painted to resemble the original. The real sword was never here, Hiroshi explained. Someone switched it with this replica before the guests arrived. He turned his attention to the scratch marks. These were made by the clasp of a similar box, likely one carried by the thief. They carefully placed the replica inside, making it appear as if the sword was stolen from a locked case. Kenji was stunned. But who and how did they know the sword was here? Hiroshi smiled. Ah, that's the final piece of the puzzle. He gathered the guests again. The thief, he announced, is someone who knew the sword was valuable, someone who was present at the gathering, and someone who had the means to create a convincing replica. His gaze settled on Miss Akari. You mentioned being engrossed in conversation with Professor Ito, but you also described the sword's intricate carvings in detail, details you couldn't have seen if you were so engrossed. Furthermore, as a novelist, you possess the creativity and resourcefulness to devise such a clever scheme. Akari paled. She confessed to the crime. She'd been researching Japanese mythology for her novel, and had become obsessed with the Kusanagi legend. She'd learned about Kenji's replica and planned to replace it with her own, intending to sell the original for a fortune. The rain had stopped, and a sliver of moon peeked through the clouds. Kenji, though shaken, was relieved to have his sword back. He thanked Hiroshi for his brilliant deduction. "A locked room mystery is never truly locked," Hiroshi said, smiling. "There's always a crack, a hidden detail, waiting to be discovered." He looked at the recovered sword, its gleaming surface reflecting the moonlight. Even in the darkest night, truth finds a way to shine through.